The engagement ring in Caleb's pocket felt heavier than the 10-pound sledgehammer swinging from his belt. He was 3 miles deep inside the Black Mountain, surrounded by the crushing weight of the earth, when the ventilation fan suddenly died. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was a death sentence. As the methane alarm began its high-pitched scream, Caleb didn't reach for his self-rescuer first. He reached for that ring, gripping the gold band through the denim, realizing that the promise he made to Sarah on the front porch might be the last lie he ever told. The dust in Harlan County doesn't just sit on the surface. It stains. It works its way into the pores of the skin, into the fibers of the clothes, and eventually into the souls of the people. Caleb Thorne was 24 years old, and he already looked 30. He had the Carlier's crouch, a subtle forward stoop of the shoulders from walking in tunnels that were never quite tall enough for a grown man to stand upright. It was 1974. The energy crisis was in full swing, and coal was booming. The mines were running 24 hours a day. Hungry for men, hungry for labor. Caleb was a roof bolter, one of the most dangerous jobs in the pit. His job was to secure the ceiling, drilling steel bolts into the rock to keep the mountain from coming down on their heads. It was loud, wet, and terrifying work, but it paid well. And Caleb needed the money. He needed the money because of Sarah. Sarah Miller wasn't coal people. Her father was a grocer, a man with soft hands and a clean shop on Main Street. Sarah was a school teacher, teaching 3rd grade at the elementary school down in the valley. She smelled like chalk dust and lavender soap, a sharp contrast to the diesel and sulfur that clung to Caleb. They met at the harvest dance in the high school gym. Caleb had scrubbed his skin raw with pumice soap, trying to get the black rings out from around his eyes. He stood in the back, awkward in his Sunday suit, watching her laugh with her friends. When he finally asked her to dance, he didn't hold her close. He was afraid he'd get her dressed dirty. "You hold me like I'm breakable, Caleb," she had whispered, looking up at him with eyes the color of creek water. "In my line of work," Caleb replied, "everything breaks eventually." That was the beginning, a courtship that happened in the margins of the shift work. Caleb worked the hour shift, midnight to 8 in the morning. He would come home as the sun was rising, wash the grime off in the tin tub on the back porch, and sleep until the afternoon. Sarah would come over after school. Sitting on the porch swing while he drank his coffee, his eyes still red from the dust. They fell in love the way the seasons change in Kentucky slowly, and then all at once. But the mine was always the third person in their relationship. It sat at the dinner table with them. It was in the cough that rattled in Caleb's chest when he laughed too hard. It was in the fear that flashed in Sarah's eyes every time the fire siren wailed in the distance. The tension started 6 months in. Sarah wanted to get married, but she had a condition. "I can't be a miner's widow." "Caleb," she told him one evening, watching the fireflies dance over the tall grass, "I see the women in town. I see your mother waiting by the phone. Jump in its shadows. I can't live like that. I won't. It's the only trade I know." "Sarah," Caleb said, his voice defensive, "it pays the bills. It buys the house." "I don't care about the house," she snapped, a rare display of anger. "I care about you. My uncle works at the Ford plant in Louisville. He says they're hiring. Good pay. Safe work. We could leave." "Leave." The word tasted like betrayal. To a mountain man, leaving the hollows was like cutting off a limb. His father died in these mines. His grandfather died in these mines. The coal was in his blood. But looking at Sarah, seeing the desperate love in her face, Caleb felt his resolve crack. "Give me 1 more year," he bargained. 1 more year to save up a nest egg. Then we go to Louisville. Promis. Sarah looked at him, searching for the lie. She didn't find one. 1 year, she agreed, and then we leave the dust behind. The months ticked by. Caleb worked double shifts whenever he could, hoarding every dollar in a coffee can under the floorboards. He was exhausted. He moved through life like a ghost, sleeping in snatches, fueling himself on black coffee and the thought of Sarah in a white dress. But the mind has a way of knowing when you're trying to leave. It gets jealous. It was a Tuesday in late October, the grave shift. The air outside was cold, hinting at an early frost. Inside the mine, it was 55 degrees. Same as always. Caleb was working Section 6, a notorious part of the mine known for bad top, unstable rock formations. His partner that night was an older man named Preacher Watts, a deacon who hummed hymns while he loaded the explosives. "Top stock on tonight. Caleb Preacher," sighed, pausing to listen to the creaking of the timbers. "It's always talking, Preacher." "Just don't listen," Caleb muttered, wrestling the heavy bolting machine into position. He was tired. His reflexes were slow. He was thinking about the ring in his pocket. He had bought it that morning, a modest diamond, but it shone like a star. He planned to give it to Sarah on Saturday. The shift was brutal. The continuous miner hit a pocket of sandstone, sparking violently. The dust was thicker than usual, clogging the sprays. Caleb wiped his goggles, squinting through the gloom. He drilled a hole, shoved the resin cartridge in, and tightened the bolt. One down. 10,000 to go. Then the ventilation stopped. It wasn't a bang. It was the sudden absence of the wind. The massive fans on the surface, which sucked fresh air through the miles of tunnels, had failed. Without the fans, the air stopped moving. And when the air stops moving, the methane gas, explosive and odorless, starts to pool at the ceiling. "Fans are down," Preacher yelled, his voice echoing weirdly in the sudden stillness. "Kill the power! Kill it all! Kill it all!" Caleb reached for the breaker on his machine, slamming it off. The tunnel plunged into absolute silence, save for the heavy breathing of the men. Then the smell hit them. Not gas, but smoke. Thick, rubbery smoke. Belt fire. Caleb realized, his stomach dropping. The conveyor belt, miles long, must have seized up and caught fire from the friction. A belt fire was a miner's worst nightmare. It churned out toxic smoke that could kill a man in minutes, and it blocked the primary escape route. "Masks on," Caleb ordered, his training taking over. He grabbed his self-rescuer, a small metal canister on his belt, popped the seal, and shoved the mouthpiece into his mouth. The chemical reaction inside the canister made the air taste hot and metallic, but it filtered out the carbon monoxide. They couldn't go out the main way. The fire would be raging there. They had to take the secondary. The old return air course. It was a tunnel that hadn't been used in years, filled with debris and ankle-deep water. "Move," Caleb signaled with his light. The journey was a nightmare. The smoke was creeping in, a gray snake curling along the roof. Visibility dropped to zero. They were crawling on their hands and knees, feeling the rails of the track to guide them. Every few yards, Preacher would stumble, his old lungs struggling against the resistance of the respirator. Caleb grabbed Preacher by the belt, dragging him forward. "Not here, old man," he thought. "Not tonight." He thought of Sarah. He thought of the argument they'd had 2 days ago. She had begged him to call in sick, said she had a bad feeling. He had laughed it off. He wasn't laughing now. The irony tasted like ash. He was dying in the very place he promised to leave, for money he would never spend. They reached a fallen pile of rock, blocking the path. They had to dig. With their bare hands, they clawed at the sharp slate, tearing their fingernails. The smoke was thicker now, stinging their eyes, burning any exposed skin. Caleb's chest was screaming. The self-rescuer was getting hot, burning his lips. That meant high carbon monoxide. He was running out of time. He paused for a second, his hand brushing against the ring box in his pocket. If I die here, he thought, she'll never know I was going to say yes. She think I chose the coal. That thought terrified him more than the fire. It gave him a surge of adrenaline. He didn't just dig, he attacked the rock. He moved boulders a man his size shouldn't be able to lift. He cleared a hole just big enough to squeeze through. He shoved Preacher through first, then dragged himself after. They were in the intake airway now. The air was clearer here. They stumbled forward, seeing the faint glow of daylight miles away at the drift mouth. When they burst out of the mine, they collapsed on the gravel. The air outside was sweet and cold. Men were running toward them with stretchers. Caleb ripped the mask off his face, vomiting black bile onto the ground. He gasped, his lungs greedily pulling in the oxygen. Wash alive. He woke up in the hospital 2 days later. His throat felt like he had swallowed broken glass. His hands were bandaged. The room was white and sterile. And Sarah was there. She was asleep in the chair next to the bed, her head resting on his mattress. She looked exhausted, her eyes puffy from crying. She was holding his hand, her grip tight, ebony sleep. Caleb tried to speak, but only a croak came out. He moved his hand, and Sarah's eyes snapped open. "Caleb," she whispered, disbelief washing over her face. "Oh, God." "Caleb." She buried her face in his chest, sobbing. He could feel her tears soaking through the hospital gown. He stroked her hair with his bandaged hand. "I'm sorry," he rasped. "I'm so sorry." She said, pulling back to look at him. "You're safe. That's all that matters." Caleb shifted painfully. He nodded toward the bedside table, where his personal effects were in a plastic bag. His wallet, his keys, and the velvet box. "Open it," he whispered. Sarah looked confused. She reached for the bag and pulled out the box. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The diamond caught the fluorescent light of the hospital room. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "I was coming out," Caleb said, each word a struggle. "That shift, ... It was going to be the last month. I bought that to promise you Louisville. We go to Louisville." Sarah looked from the ring to him. She didn't put it on. She closed the box and set it down firmly on the table. "No," she said softly. Caleb's heart sank. "Sarah, we're not going to Louisville in a month," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "We're going as soon as you can walk out of this hospital. I don't care about the nest egg. I don't care about the money. I realized something while I was waiting at that mine gate, Caleb." She took his hand again, kissing the bandaged knuckles. "I can live in a shack. I can live in a tent, but I cannot live wondering if the man I love is being buried alive. The coal doesn't love you, Caleb. It doesn't care if you have a name or a face. But, Ido." Caleb looked at her. Really looked at her. He saw the strength in her jaw, the fierce love in her eyes. He realized he had been fighting the wrong battle. He thought being a man meant providing, even if it killed him. But being a man meant being there. "Okay," Caleb whispered, a tear cutting a clean track through the remaining soot on his cheek. "Okay. No more coal." 6 months later, a moving truck sat in front of the small house in the hollow. Caleb was lifting boxers. He still had a scar on his cheek from the rock fall, and he still coughed when the weather turned damp. But he stood straighter now. He walked to the edge of the porch and looked out at the mountains. One last time, they were beautiful, majestic, and cruel. He could hear the distant rumble of the coal trucks. It was a sound that had been the soundtrack of his life. Sarah walked out, placing a hand on his back. "You ready?" Caleb turned to her. She was wearing the ring. It sparkled in the sunlight, brighter than any vein of coal he had ever found. "Yeah," Caleb said, turning his back on the mountain. "I'm ready." He climbed into the truck, put it in gear, and drove away. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. He looked forward, to the flatlands, to the factories, to a life where the sun shone every single day. He left the darkness behind, buried deep in the Kentucky hills, along with the ghost of the man he used to be. The mine kept churning, chewing up men and spitting out coal. But it would never get Caleb Thorne again. And that, in the grand scheme of Harlan County, was a victory worth more than gold.